All right, welcome to week 2 of Beat the Odds. As Mike Tyson famously said, and we love to quote, everyone has a plan till you get punched in the face. And some teams got one right in the old kisser. See why the boys say don't freak out, at least not yet. Beat the Odds starts right now.
From our Las Vegas studios, this is Beat the Odds, sponsored by Superbook at the Westgate Las Vegas Resort and Casino, and powered by Sports Grid.
Well, greetings from our Las Vegas studio. I'm Dave Hall.
And I'm Mariah Janos. Keeping it with the boxing theme, my team, New England, dropped Cincy to the canvas, while Aaron Rodgers and his boys put up less of a fight than Glass Joe.
Love that video game. Could never beat Tyson, though. Got close. Well, when it comes to week 1, of all the people in the world, it's actually Fat Jack who has the best advice. Looks can be deceiving.
Well, I mean, it worked on his wife. He says it can work for sports betting, too.
Ooh, sassy Mariah. Well, coming up on today's show, Teddy and Jack will tell us why week 2 is a totally different beast, plus their player prop battle and best bets of the weekend.
And I'll be chatting with our champ, Brandon Marshall, about the players' approach to week 2, especially if they're down 0-1. Plus, our friends from Sports Grid are back.
Hey Vegas, we're excited to beat the odds with you. Coming up, Joe Lisi and I will look at your week 1 standouts and disappointments and what it could mean for week 2. So sit tight. We'll be coming up soon. It's back to you in Vegas.
Sorry, Jack.
No, it's okay.
Always the butt of the joke.
No, you're not wrong, though. I mean, bad lighting and good angles. It really took me a long way.
All right. Well, every week you guys have a betting theme, and this week the theme is do not overreact. So we're going to start with a new thing, some shockers and stunners. Teddy, get us started.
Sure. Well, some people might want to call them stunners. You can call them bad beats. Whatever you like. There were some rough endings to games last week. We'll start with Denver, Seattle, and that one certainly stands out as a team, as a game that a little frustrating if you had the under. Not one safety, 2 safeties in the ball game, and a team that hadn't scored a TD all day, all of a sudden against a prevent defense late in the 4th, marching down the field in the end zone. Tough if you had the under in that one. LA plus the points on Sunday night in Detroit. That one was rough. Anytime you're basically covering the whole second half and then losing in overtime when you don't get possession, no one enjoys that. But the worst one of them all was probably Tennessee plus the points in Chicago. Teams that didn't score an offensive touchdown and were down 17 plus points in a game in the history of the league. How about 3 and 1,225? The third one of the 3 came on Sunday.
Yeah, how about 66-1 against the number if you had a 17-point lead as an underdog? I mean, that's where Tennessee was. Lots of different ways to. I'm not sure I'd be making my my reservations in New Orleans if I was Chicago just yet. We're going to need to see better play.
Sure.
And yeah, I think that the books, if they want to do something, get rid of these in-game parlays and give half the money back if you have a 3.5-point underdog or more in pro football, or a 7.5 or more in college football and lose in overtime. I mean, how about a little? You were there most of the way. Anybody?
Cost me $10 Monday night.
Exactly. That was a bad one for sure. You knew when they lost the coin toss, though.
When it went to OT,
yeah,
we knew that was coming.
And, of course, we had shockers as well this past weekend, a good handful of them. Certainly New England, which Mariah talked about already, as a nice shocker. If you had them on the money line in Cincinnati, you talk about Pittsburgh winning outright at Atlanta by margin. And, of course, Dallas was an underdog in Cleveland. They certainly didn't look like underdogs in that ballgame. A dominant performance.
Yeah, how'd you like to be part of the dog pound? Get all face painted up and go out there. 22 of their first 44 plays, Cleveland that is, went for 0 or negative yards. 50% going nowhere. I mean, you're there most of the time. You got face painted. You're all lathered up. Nobody's going anywhere. That was
Sounds like your high school dating life.
You know what? Angles and bad lighting.
0 for 22, Jack?
No, I did bet a little better than Deshaun Watson did. But yeah, and you know, if you watched the show last week, you also got the under in our prop bet with Deshaun Watson. So that's even more. We kind of onto that one early.
All right, hang tight, guys. We'll get back to you in the next segment. These week 1 games can be tough for the wise guys, too. You know, Mariah is at the Superbook Westgate Las Vegas with more on that.
Thanks, Dave. I'm here with EVP of Superbook Operations, Jay Cornegay. Jay, we look back to last week. You said there was money coming in on the underdog. Some of them did prevail, but overall, how did you guys do in week 1?
We did okay. We won 3 out of the 4 isolated games, Thursday, Friday, Sunday night, Monday night. On Sunday, it was give and take a little bit. Outside the halftimes, which a lot of people played these teams that were favorites and maybe trailing or tied at halftime, and they came back and won the second half. That was probably the only sore spot for us, but overall, a small winner.
And looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, what kind of action are you seeing early on?
Yeah, we're getting action across the board. It seems like every game's getting some attention, but early action from some of the educated players on Arizona, certainly Denver at home against Pittsburgh, and of course Cincinnati against Kansas City. So a surprise there, but a lot of action across the board.
Cincinnati's interesting because of that performance last week, but are you seeing overreaction from bettors during this time of year?
You know, week 2, there's certainly a lot of overreaction to what happened last week because everybody's just focusing on that. But you really need to focus on just the power rankings. You make small adjustments. That's what we do as odds makers. But Cincinnati is a case where certainly the educated players are not overreacting because that dismal performance by Cincinnati last week hasn't shied them away from supporting them against Kansas City at Kansas City.
All right, Jay, thank you so much. Dave, we'll send it back to you in studio.
All right, thanks, guys. To our friends watching on the Yes Network, you have 2 football teams, and they both looked pretty awful. So is there any hope in New York? Maybe.
Before we head to break, with a win in Week 1, Caleb Williams became just the 4th #1 overall pick in league history to start at quarterback and get a win in Week 1. But who are the other 3? The answer coming up next.
Beat the Odds is sponsored by Superbook Westgate Las Vegas and powered by Sports Grid.
Welcome back. Before the break, we asked you, with a win in Week 1, Caleb Williams became just the 4th #1 overall pick in league history to start at quarterback and win in the opening weekend. Who are the other 3? The answer: David Carr with Houston in 2002, John Elway with Denver in 1983, and Jim Plunkett with New England in 1971. A nice look over Allegiant Stadium there. Scan that QR code on your screen. It's our website. Good stuff on there, beattheoddstv.com. All right, let's bring in our guy, Brandon Marshall, the champ. 1 week down. Just how telling is that first week? Is it telling at all?
I think it truly depends on what happened. You know, if you play a game like Carolina, you know, you have to be scared. You have to be worried because, the team that you had last year, it looks like there's no improvement, right? So I truly think it depends on what's going on and what happens in Week 1. But for the most part, you know what? You learn from it and you move on.
Now, from a player's perspective, entering Week 2, especially if you're in an 0-1 situation, how do you manage those emotions, those expectations, and does Week 2 feel like a do-or-die situation?
It does. The beautiful thing about the NFL is every game matters. Every game counts. That's why we have the highest viewership, right? So we went 0-1. Yes, you want to tell everybody to relax and just calm down. It's just one game, but at the end of the day, you only get 17 opportunities, right? So every game counts. So there is some pressure, and there's some pressure on the coaches and the players.
And we've been talking about Week 2 being the week of overreaction from the public, maybe even from players themselves. But did you see anything in Week 1 that you think people are underreacting to, whether it be good or bad?
You know what? I think people are underreacting to Baker Mayfield. Okay, he was 24 for 30, 289 and 4 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield has reinvented himself in Tampa Bay. I don't think it's talked about enough. He looks like the former #1 pick that he is. And, his time in Cleveland wasn't that great and he bounced around, but I love what he's doing right now in Tampa. And he looks like he's just different. He's back to himself. So I think people are underreacting to him. He looks really good right now.
Yeah, he does. Seems like he's really found his home. Brandon, thank you so much. Now, a pearl of wisdom from Jack. Looks can be deceiving. We said it worked on his wife. We'll see if it works here. But we're talking football. So what do you mean by that, Jack?
Well, a couple of different things, and it's all going to be about you weren't as bad as you appeared, you weren't as good as you appeared. Carolina is a great example that one of the tried and true ways that you approach a team from a wagering standpoint is a team that loses by 40 points, it turns around as an underdog the next week. They have a very high percentage of covering that next week. Translation, you're never as bad as you were. You're going to regress back to the middle, probably get some value because the general public can't go there and stomach that. They did turn the ball over 3 times. The other one, I don't think we should throw Caleb Williams a parade just yet. I mean, yes, he was. We keep saying, who's the first quarterback in a long time to win? He didn't do anything. I'm pretty sure I could have run the option to been just as effective. He had under 100 yards passing. They basically did it with defense, did it with turnovers, and I didn't bet on that game. So it's not like I have a resentful heart for that. But those type of things, let's wait and see on him. Let's not overreact to the 1-0. Generally speaking, again, if you have 2 undefeated teams, the underdog typically is pretty good the next game. 2 defeated teams, you want to play the home team. So there's a couple different trends that'll lead you back toward the middle. Don't overreact to what we saw last week.
Hold on, I'm getting a phone call from Chicago Mayor. The parade has been canceled.
Thank goodness,
Yes,
because we're a little
just
bit
now.
early here. Let's go ahead and get a first down before we do that. We're not going to get a block punt every week.
Wow, you're fired up over this.
A little bit.
Well, Teddy, New Orleans looked fantastic in week 1, but you're saying the same thing. Hey, let's pump the brakes a little bit.
Tap the brakes. Exactly. I mean, when you talk about week 1 overreactions, the math is really simple. Since 2010, a team off a win against a team off a loss. In week 2, after week 1, 45 and 64 against the spread. That's 41%. So you want the team that looked bad last week, not the team that looked good. In week 2, off a loss as a favorite, those teams are 44 and 34 ATS. Again, not eye-popping numbers, but slow and steady wins this race. In general, in week 2, we're looking for teams off a loss or teams that might have looked a little bit too good and bet them off a win. For example, New Orleans, as you just talked about, Dave. Yeah, they look great, sure, against what is probably the worst team in the league. This week, it's a little bit of a different type of opponent. We'll see if New Orleans can do comparable things. The sharp money says no. And of course, it's also worth noting some of the veteran quarterbacks who struggled in that first game back off of injury. Most notably, Kirk Cousins didn't look good, Aaron Rodgers didn't look good, Deshaun Watson didn't look good at all. So beware of these QBs coming off serious injuries who didn't play in the preseason.
Looking for value early in the year. That's the key. That's not overreact and make bad decisions that losing players make. We want to look for value.
Mm-hmm. All right, great advice, fellas. Well, Derek Carr, talking about New Orleans, looked good in week 1, but he has a much tougher test this week. Let's send it to our guys at the Sports Grid.
Kevin Walsh and Joe Lisi here, taking a look at some surprising week 1 standouts. And at the quarterback position, I mean, really team-wise, New Orleans stunned people. I'm in on New Orleans this year, Joe. I didn't think they would beat down Carolina like that. A 47-10 final. Their quarterback, Derek Carr, New Orleans, throws for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Nearly 9 yards per pass attempt there. They dominated from the word go. Do you think that Derek Carr in New Orleans can carry this over with a big game against Dallas on deck?
It's possible, Kev, but I'm expecting Derek Carr to struggle. We saw that secondary for Dallas limit Deshaun Watson and Cleveland last week. 169 total yards, multiple turnovers in regards to that back end. I think that continues against Derek Carr. Derek Carr in New Orleans faced the benefit of multiple turnovers against Bryce Young as well, Ford Fields. And keep an eye out for Taysom Hill as it relates to the offense as well. He was utilized in a lot of RPO sets last week.
You talk about what Dallas was able to do against Cleveland, and one thing that stood out were some of the offensive line injuries for Cleveland going into that game, and Dallas took advantage of it. For people who were not in on New Orleans, again, I think they can really win the South this year, so it was very encouraging, but people question the offensive line. How they hold up against Micah Parsons and that Dallas front will tell a lot. It doesn't need to be a victory. Derek Carr doesn't need to throw for 350 yards, but if he can keep the efficiency up and they can hang in that football game, even in a loss, I think it's a really good sign, big picture. Now, we talk about stuns, and you beat a team in division by 37. That's stunning. People might still argue what New England did to Cincinnati was the bigger surprise. The biggest dog on the slate gets a win, and they did that by riding their their running back, Ramondre Stevenson, for 25 carries, 120 yards, and a touchdown. Do you think Stevenson could have a superstar season?
No, I expect him in the area of about 700 to 800 yards this year, and I expect him to regress against a very good defensive front in Seattle that held Denver last week to only 99 total yards on the ground, 4 yards per rush. He regresses, and I think Seattle picks up the victory.
Keep eyes on Detroit wide receiver Jameson Williams, a first-round draft choice who had a monster Sunday nighter with 121 yards and a touchdown. Most targeted player for Detroit in that game as well. A breakout could be coming. Can't wait to watch it play out. Back to Vegas.
All right, fellas, thank you. Are we already on Michael Penix's watch in Atlanta? Well, Teddy says not so fast. See why he likes Kirk Cousins to bounce back this week. All right, start stretching, boys. Our player prop showdown is next.
Before we take another timeout, with 6 made field goals in Week 1, Pittsburgh kicker Chris Boswell became just the second kicker in league history to hit 6 field goals without a miss in Week 1. But who was the other? The answer after the break.
You're watching Beat the Odds, sponsored by Superbook at the Westgate Las Vegas Resort and Casino, and powered by Sports Grid.
Welcome back. Before the break, we asked you, with 6 made field goals in Week 1, Pittsburgh kicker Chris Boswell became just the second kicker in league history to hit 6 field goals without a miss in the opening weekend. But who was the other? The answer, John Carney, who made field goals for San Diego during a 1993 Week 1 matchup against Seattle. Now let's send it back out to your friends with Sports Grid.
Kevin Walsh and Joe Lisi here, taking a look at some stars who missed the mark in week number 1 and trying to figure out if they will be able to bounce back. We start in Detroit, where superstar wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown had just 3 grabs for 13 yards in that Sunday nighter. In week 2, they're slated to play Tampa Bay. Could St. Brown bounce back for bettors next week, Joe?
I think he will, Kev. You're talking about a player last year that had 115 total receptions, over 1,500 receiving yards, and more importantly, 15 touchdowns. He was utilized more of a decoy. We saw secondary wide receiver Jameson Williams break out the other night for over 100 yards in terms of that win over L.A. and Matt Stafford. He bounces back against Tampa Bay this week.
One thing for Amon-Ra, 2 matchups last year against Tampa Bay in the regular season, 12 catches for 124 yards, a touchdown in that game, and then in the playoffs as well. Scored 8 grabs, 77. It's going to be hard to keep Amon-Ra St. Brown out of the end zone, potentially. We'll see what the books do with those St. Brown props when they come out. Now, you want to talk about disappointments. Probably none bigger than Burrow and Cincinnati, the biggest favorite on that Sunday Week 1 slate, and they lose outright to New England. People will chalk up, oh, no T. Higgins, Chase wasn't practicing. I think there's no excuse for how bad that Cincy offense looked, Joe. Are you losing some faith in Burrow and the boys?
No, because he owns Kansas City statistically. 4 games, Kev. He owns a 3-1 total record, completed over 70% of his passes, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's 3-1 against Pat Mahomes. I think they bounce back in a big way. And Jamar Chase, look for a breakout performance as well. Last week, only 6 receptions for 62 yards.
My thing with Burrow is this is not the first time that he has left so much to be desired in the opening week. But I didn't see any injury designations or reason for him to look the way he did against New England. Maybe this is just who Burrow is. Maybe the New England defense is a little bit better than we were anticipating. I'll also quickly mention Vegas running back Zamir White really lost out to Alexander Madison, something to keep an eye on, where Antonio Pierce, their head coach, says he will be going with the hot hand. That's Joe Lisi. I'm Kevin Walsh. We'll have you covered as we approach week 2.
All right, these two would struggle to do 7 push-ups total, but no matter, it's time for our player prop showdown. Today, you guys are going to debate Kirk Cousins.
Over under 7 push-ups, Teddy. Where are you?
I'm going over personally.
Ooh.
I'm also going over with Kirk Cousins, 226.5 passing yards as we record. And look, I understand that Kirk Cousins struggled last week against Pittsburgh's defense with Watt in the backfield on every play. This week, he's going against a much weaker defense. And it's a game where Atlanta's an underdog, so they're likely to be playing from behind, which will give them more passing opportunities. But don't underestimate how good this offense is capable of being. All 5 linemen back. They've got weapons in Pitts and London and Robinson. And the defense they're facing, vulnerable. I'll just leave it at that. We're getting a cheap number here because he looked bad last week. I say Cousins over the total.
Last week was a layup with Watson. This one, not so much so. I'll tell you this. He's not Jay Cutler, but I think Kirk Cousins is still, there's a lot to be desired with his body language and how he's going to be this year and where he's going to end up. I think there's a reason why they may have taken a quarterback early. And so I would also look at this. We're not factoring in when we look at this Father Time and an Achilles heel that went down. I happen to have personal information about some Achilles heel injuries in the past. And being able to push off and throw, he looked like his arm was not quite as strong. I know just from an old dude who tore his Achilles heel, he couldn't get back to pickleball and doing things he liked to do. I think that a professional athlete might have a little tougher time. Let's go to the total and let's wait and see on this guy.
This Achilles is going to go where the sun don't shine, Jack. All right, good job, boys. Teddy nailed his best bet last week. As for Jack,
I should get half back.
Break,
Overtime.
All right, see who they like this week. Our best bets are next. All right, welcome back to Beat the Odds. You know, sometimes karma comes quick. After bragging the entire last week about going 17-5 in his best bets.
Partial responsibility, a coin toss away from winning that one. We'll get right back on track this time.
Well, the humble Teddy nailed his first pick, so he gets to go up first with his this week.
Who do we have, Teddy?
Let's talk about Indy and their matchup at Green Bay. And this is, frankly, a bet against Malik Willis. Malik Willis, 67 career pass attempts, 0 touchdowns. In college, 1 SEC defense, 0 touchdowns, 3 INTs. 15 sacks in those 67 pass attempts, by the way, for Willis. He's only been with the team less than 3 weeks. They've got no quarterback. And when a team has no quarterback and they're facing an opponent off a loss with quick strike ability, I'm interested. Indy.
I didn't have a security blanket growing up, but if I had it would be the unders on this show. I'm really good with those, so we're going to go under. New England's a type of team they need to run the ball, win time of possession, make no mistakes, keep scoring down. They had 16 points last week. 7 of the last 8 Seattle road games have gone under. New England going under all the time. Let's go under the total in Seattle, New England.
Okay. All right. Great show, guys. We'll see you next week for another edition of Beat the Odds.